Today I want to record a podcast in which I discuss how we could understand the Russophiles from their commentary of the Ukrainian conflict, especially in view of recent developments. Before I begin, I want to emphasize that I can sympathize with a lot of the points that these Russophiles are making. When they are criticizing American imperialism, they're very sharp, they're very to the point, and when they are talking about the need for people from third world countries, from the global south, to have their own voice heard on the global stage, I agree with that. So I can sympathize with a lot of what the Russophiles say, but especially when it comes to the Ukrainian conflict, there are some Russophiles, I think, that have gone too far, and sometimes I just figure that they are just pulling it out of their rear end. I have found basically 10, 11 points. Let's just go over them very quickly. 1. Before the 2022 Russian invasion or special military operation, they said with high degrees of confidence, absolute certainty, that Russia would not invade Ukraine. Well, Russia did. And then they quickly went to number 2, which is that Russia would win in days. But when that did not happen, they changed their tune to say that that was because Putin was very timid. Putin wanted to keep a good relationship with Ukraine, which I think is quite understandable. I could agree with that. I thought perhaps they had a good point. Maybe that's how Putin was thinking. Perhaps even now today, I still think perhaps that was part of the calculation of the Putin government. So they said number 3, that Russia would win in months. Okay. But the 4th point that they were saying, some of them at least, were saying that the Ukrainian army is made up full of neo-Nazis. They say that all the most fierce, most capable fighting forces of the Ukrainian army are all Nazis. I don't know. I have questions about that because I'm not born yesterday, and I know that yes, across Eastern Europe, especially the former Soviet Union, especially Ukraine, but more so in Russia, there is a neo-Nazi problem, and there are a lot of skinheads. So okay. That's another point. And the 5th point they made was that the strategic retreat of Russia from the Kherson and the Kharkov regions were basically a smart move. It was because they didn't want to keep those places. They didn't want to occupy those places. Those are not militarily advantageous to do. They want to straighten out their contact lines so that they can maybe push back later. They don't understand particularly, but it must be smart because the Russians did it. I was certainly not convinced about that, but it's okay. The Ukrainians are very capable fighting forces, and they made some good pushes. All right, that makes sense. Then number 6, they were saying that Russia would win this year. And then this year, the next year. Okay, well, I guess they were cheering for the Russians, but by that point, it was quite clear that this is no longer a war of maneuver. It was not a war with good strategic plan. It became a war of attrition. And in attritional warfare, there is a win. There is only a loser and a bigger loser, right? So this is certainly not what I mean. Unless what they were saying was that Putin was stupid and the Russians were stupid. Unless that's what they are thinking, it must not be what the Russians wanted when they went in to Ukraine. By that point, it was absolutely clear that the Russians encountered unexpected, defense, and an unexpectedly strong defense from the Ukrainians. And then there is this seventh point when Russia did some breakthrough. They say that the Russian steamroller is going to crush the Ukrainians. It's going to crush the NATO army. That's use of this steamroller. I found this is a little bit too animated and a description. It just does not really reflect reality. If a steamroller goes at the pace of 1 meter a day, then that's a steamroller. But I think that's not exactly what they were saying. So that's nonsense. And the eighth point, they say that the Ukrainian government is collapsing. It is collapsing. Well, maybe it is collapsing. I can see that because the Ukrainian economy is very bad. Its infrastructure has been destroyed. Its industry has been destroyed. Millions of civilians have become refugees and displaced either internally or externally. So I can see that the Ukrainian economy is collapsing or perhaps has already collapsed. And so maybe the Ukrainian government is only in place because it's receiving a bloodline or some sort of support from the West. Without that support, it would collapse. That's understandable, of course, because no government, however moral or superior it is, without money, it will not survive, right? So, yeah, but after they've been saying that the Ukrainian government is collapsing for a year, the Ukrainian army still has not collapsed. And that's, of course, it's gonna put some question marks on your mind, right? And ninth point, they say that now that the Ukrainian army, the former army, has invaded the Kursk region, they say that the Russians must have knowledge about this because the Russians have first top-tier intelligence. They have satellites. They have personal intelligence. They knew that the Ukrainians would invade. Well, then why did the Russians do nothing? Why did they allow the Ukrainians come in? So that they can have millions displaced themselves, so that they can bomb their own infrastructure. How is that a smart move? That's basically nonsense, right? That is absolute nonsense. And then they say, the 10th point, they say that the Ukrainians have already lost. The Ukrainians either have already been pushed back, or they are going to all be killed. Those who have invaded Russia. Well, that is to be seen. Maybe they are right this time, right? I'm not saying that these Ukrainians and perhaps a lot of mercenaries from NATO or neighboring countries. I'm not saying that these people are all going to stay in Russia forever, that they will go all the way to Moscow, that they will topple the Russian government. I'm not saying that, but I don't see it being so easy that just by the flip of a finger that the Ukrainians will be pushed out. It takes a lot of on-the-ground combat to actually be able to push them out. And right now, it is highly questionable whether Russia has the manpower and the equipment to do it in a timely fashion. And specifically, with regards to one or two Russophiles, there's this 11th point, which I find personally quite disgusting. This guy talks about 5,000, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 Ukrainians dead a day. And when he says it, he is so happy. And this guy wants to say that he is fighting for peace, he's peace-loving. And of course, he always say that he is such an American patriot. He's fought for America, he will die for America. And then he says all these nonsense, right? What kind of person is that? I mean, maybe he likes America. I don't know. He certainly loves Russia. But whatever he is, he does not love peace. And he does not love people, right? Because every soldier that dies needlessly, it's a tragedy. And for someone who just makes these numbers up in such a casual way and then smirk about it, this is disgusting. And this guy, I'm quite happy that he got raided by the FBI. I think he has something wrong with him. I don't know whether he is really an agent, a foreign agent, or maybe he is not. I don't know, but something is not correct with this guy. But anyway, all these are the points that I find, the things that I find I take issue with the Russophiles with regards to their commentary on the Ukrainian conflict. Now, I think from observing this conflict over 2.5 years, I think there are five points that we can draw from this. Number one, the first point is that I am absolutely certain that the Russian leaders thought it would be like 2014 when they went into Ukraine in the beginning. They thought that they could easily either topple the Ukrainian government or at least force a retreat from the Donbass region of the Ukrainian army. So they could just simply annex those two regions. That did not happen. That was a mistake. Perhaps I think it was a misunderstanding of the situation, military and political and diplomatic situation in Ukraine. Second, the Russians are basically, I think they are really just like the Tsarist Russians. They are not really internationalists. They want to... Their ultimate goal actually here is territorial expansion. They want to bring all places where there are Russians, ethnic Russians, into the country of the Russian Federation. And that basically means colonialism or new colonialism, territorial expansion. And this is something that really hasn't been seen outside of Palestine since the 20th century, right? And I am thinking right now that they are spewing all these anti-American imperialist propaganda, basically to use the sentiment that people have against imperialism. They are very good at pointing out all those imperialist, the dirty deeds that the Americans are doing, that perhaps the West are doing, for example, the French in Africa. But what they are doing is exactly the same, if not worse. Thirdly, I think the Russians are certainly not as militarily strong as previously thought. Everybody thought they were much stronger than it is. I included. I thought that they would certainly defeat. I mean, even with NATO support, they would defeat Ukraine, such a small country, within a year, right? Unless I thought the NATO army, the formal armies from those NATO countries would get involved directly. But those countries never got involved directly. But the Russians did not win. Why is that so? There can only be a single reason, which is that the Russians are not militarily as strong as previously believed. And why is that so? Because Russia is such a big country with a decent amount of population, 144 million, right? It's very rich in resources. The government had a surplus. Why would it not be able to win against such a small country? A country, the population less than a third of its size, economy less than a fourth of it. It can only be because that the military is exceptionally corrupt. And this is already mentioned by Prigozhin, the guy who got killed, right, because he was saying the truth. The military is exceptionally corrupt. I think there is no doubt about it. And I think the military has been feeding Putin and his administration with false information. And that is why they cannot win. right? The leadership got wrong information about both sides, about themselves, about their capabilities, and about their enemies. So if all your information is false, how can you win? The fourth point is that this is, I think, is really gonna be a challenging weeks and perhaps months for the Putin administration. If the Russians cannot push the Ukrainians out, I think by October, it will be very, very difficult for the Putin administration or regime to survive this year. If they cannot push the Ukrainians out, I think domestically there's going to be a lot of pressure, right? I'm not saying that eventually that the Ukrainians are going to kill a lot of Russians or occupy a lot of territory, but this is really causing a lot of embarrassment domestically. The Russian people thought that they were fighting a righteous war. They thought that they were liberating the Ukrainians, but now it seems like the Nazis, as they believe, have invaded them, and their leader is just not capable of. If their leader is not capable of defending Russia against the Nazis, quote unquote, then I guess they need to replace their leadership. And of course, there are a lot of more extreme elements, more anti-NATO, anti-West elements in Russia. And I think those people would perhaps displace Putin if the Russians cannot push the Ukrainians out. The fifth point, and this is of course is a side point. I said 4 or 5 because this is not really under the control of either the Ukrainians or the Russians, but I think the Russians have been counting on a Trump victory, a Trump presidency, and they've been counting on Trump's pressuring of Ukraine to basically concede. But I think they are going to be disappointed because from recent developments and from my understanding of the American electoral system, I don't think Trump will be elected this November. I think Trump will lose. I will talk about this later, perhaps I don't know, in a few days, in a few weeks. I think certainly before the election, I'll make a video, a podcast, or maybe at least write a blog about it. I think Trump will lose to Harris. And so they really can't expect Trump to be really on their side if Trump is not going to be anywhere near the White House again. Finally, there are 2 things that I have to agree with the Russophiles. They're not all bullshitting, right? There are 2 points I agree. One is that Russia has a great advantage when it comes to natural resources, and it is their control of such great wealth in natural resources that has helped them withstand the series or non-stop sanctions from the West. These resources everybody wants. Even the West people, even in the West, people want it. But of course, they have cut themselves off for a large part. But as those are commodities, they can easily find alternative buyers, and so these resources are propping up the Russian economy. They're doing okay. Right? They're not doing the best. They could do better, but they're doing because they have to divert a lot of resources to military production. But they're doing okay. So that's one advantage that they have. But I think they are not really using it wisely. A lot of people have commented, I've read, and I agree, which is that if the Russians did not start this war, instead they used their advantages in their economic base, right, in their resources, and they focused instead on developing technologies and improving the standard of living inside Russia, which is already very big. I mean, with such a big country, you could actually invite ethnic Russians from Ukraine to migrate to your country, and still it will not be too many people, right? That's, of course, you don't want to necessarily give up land, but that's not your land to begin with, right? They could use it, put these economic opportunities to good use, but instead they're wasting this opportunity on a war that I think is not going to actually resolve the situation. Because even if they occupy the entirety of Ukraine, let's say they win this war, they occupy the entirety of Ukraine, what's going to happen? They're going to have a Western front completely surrounded by enemies, basically countries who have ethnic animosity with the Russians. That is actually a worse situation than before, right? Before they were talking about stopping Ukraine from joining NATO, and they did not expect Sweden or Finland to join NATO. Now Sweden and Finland have joined NATO, and Ukraine, I think, unless the Russians can take the entirety of Ukraine, Ukraine is going to be anti-Russia for the foreseeable future. That's one point. A second point is that there is indeed a strong anti-American imperialist sentiment across the global South, and I think also to a large extent in Europe, especially in Western Europe. People don't want to be pushed around, right? People want they want freedom, they want democracy, they want independence. All these are values that you could that people can agree with, right? And the Russians had some good play with it, and they acted like an active participant in building a new world order in which there's going to be a much fairer world order. There's no longer going to be a single hegemon that dictates what a country or a people can or cannot do, how they live their lives. Well, people don't like that, right? And people could agree with Russia on that. But then what happened? What happened was that the Russians made demands on the territory of Ukraine. And you see, when the Ukrainians attacked them, what did they do? They bombed Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. They wanted to kill Ukrainian civilians. So exactly what's the difference between Russian imperialism and American imperialism? There is actually a very fine, very thin, paper-thin difference between the two. And I think it is actually not meaningful to people in the global South. So that's why I think Russia is really losing it, right? They could have a good position in a new world, but they are actively destroying their own credibility. For what? I don't know exactly for what. I guess they were just lashing out because they were having difficulty on the battlefield. That is really unwise, but that shows their nature. It shows that they don't actually like peace. They don't actually respect people, their democracy, their freedom. What they want is more power to themselves. And since there is a strong inclination for more power to the global South, they just basically played that book. But I think they are being reviewed as phony players, right? And those Russophiles, my understanding, my guess is those Russophiles, they don't actually, I don't think most of them, I don't think they are paid directly by Russia, but they are paid by the algorithm. They're paid by the algorithm in the sense that there are a lot of people who are anti-imperialist, who don't like all these wars. So when they start watching videos or listening to podcasts that are anti-imperialists, they got recommended these Russophiles, and then these Russophiles could monetize their content, and they build their community, and they can basically, make money from it, and so that's why they can continue to do it. But of course, they are spewing nonsense. They say that there's a lot of freedom in Russia. Well, there used to be a lot of freedom in Russia. But in recent years, especially in recent months, these freedoms have been all peeled away. I think recently Russia has started banning all these international websites, including major websites where these Russophiles have their platforms. So I think these Russophiles will experience some difficulties financially, but that's not really that important. To me, I think all these platforms, they should not be monetized. People who want to share their opinions, fine, do it. But it should not be a career, because once it becomes a career, once it becomes monetized, money gets involved and opinions are directly or indirectly getting paid. People are getting paid to have a certain opinion. It's not healthy. It's not a freedom of speech. I think for really to have a better world, let's not even monetize all these contents. But of course, that's a digression. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great day.